Endocrine system is the last system that we are going to do in our lecture series today. Thank you guys for paying good attention and for taking good notes, because you definitely need good notes while we do the endocrine system. Okay, so take great notes. It's going to be very sad that you didn't. All right, so the endocrine system. For this chapter, or for this section, we're going to talk about intercellular communications, hormones, and then the organs, which are the hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, thymus, pancreas, adrenals, gonads, and the pineal gland. I know that in the EMT book, you only have a pancreas. It's the only endocrine disorder that you can have. And so we're going to be introducing a lot of topics here and a lot of concepts that you probably have not heard before unless you took a seated A&P course. So bear with me, but take good notes. So first things first, let's talk about some of the, just kind of an overview. The endocrine system does function with the nervous system to control functions of the body. So nerves release neurotransmitters, and they are going to bind to things and have actions that occur. Your endocrine system uses hormones to communicate, and they're going to release those hormones into the blood, and they may be communicating with tissues that are very far away, where a nerve that touches a muscle is they're very, very close, right? So a nerve is going to be close to the tissue it's working on, the endocrine system, and your hormones that are released from the glands are not necessarily going to be in close proximity. Okay? Intercellular communication describes how different cells communicate with each other. So there's different ways that cells communicate, and obviously they have to, so that your body can work together as a whole. So intercellular communication is also known as cellular signaling, right? It's the way that cells communicate with each other. It happens throughout the body, not just with the endocrine system. So you see underlined number 3, this is what we're going to be mostly talking about in this chapter, but it happens in other places in the body by different methods. So one of the ways that this happens is by direct communication or contact-dependent communication. So, for example, the cells within your heart are in direct contact with each other. This is including the pacemaker cells, the contractile cells. They're in direct contact with each other. Okay, so they can communicate with the cell that's in direct contact with each other, and it does this via gap junctions. So we'll just kind of put that up here. All right. Ashley covered synaptic transmission at length, probably in the nervous chapter. The nervous chapter, like it's anxious. But synaptic transmission, this is the way your nerves communicate, right? And they use neurotransmitters to do this. The endocrine system is going to use hormones. They're going to be secreted from glands. So, for example, your pituitary is going to secrete a bunch of hormones. They're going to secrete them into the blood. They're going to float through the blood, and eventually, because your circulatory system goes everywhere, right, those hormones will come in contact with their target tissue. And so endocrine is the way in which we're going to be talking about things today. So your endocrine system and the glands. Okay, a lot of your endocrine hormones have antagonizing hormones. So, for example, growth hormone is going to make your cells grow, and growth hormone inhibiting hormone is going to do the opposite. It's going to make things. It's going to shut off growth hormone. Okay, and then the last one that we'll talk about is paracrine hormones. So paracrine means nearby, okay, kind of like paramedic, you're near the medicine, you know, you're not in the medicine, but you're close to it. In a paracrine hormone, or a paracrine transmission, I should say, one type of cell acts on a different type of cell that is nearby. So when we talked about like the neuromuscular junction, right, you had a nerve, right, connected to a muscle, and they are nearby, right, paracrine, right. So this is an example. This is using neurotransmitters. There's others, but this would be an example of nearby communication. We're not trying to talk to something far away. We're trying to talk to something that's close to. All right, your hormones. This will talk about chemistry of hormones, the regulation of hormones, and then we'll talk a little bit about prostaglandins. Okay. So your hormones are manufactured by endocrine glands and they're secreted directly into circulation, which you heard me say already. Okay. They travel to specific target tissues where they will bind to receptors. Okay. They're going to bind to receptors, and those receptors have two functions: to either recognize an appropriate signal, or to recognize an appropriate signal, and to initiate an appropriate response to that signal. Okay. You can have agonist and antagonist hormones. So again, I mentioned this in the last slide. These two are, one is an agonist, right? Growth hormone releasing hormone is going to do exactly what it says. It's going to cause the release of growth hormone. Growth hormone inhibiting hormone is going to stop the release of growth hormone. So we get less growth hormone release. So agonist, just for clarity, an agonist is a go. All right, agonist is go, antagonist is stop. Okay. And then your hormones also operate with feedback mechanisms, right? So a positive feedback loop, right, would be something like childbirth, right? And then a negative feedback loop would be stress, and the release of epinephrine would be an example of that. For the classes of hormones or hormone structures, I don't know that you necessarily need to memorize these, but it's covered in the book, so I'm going to talk briefly about it. I've never seen any kind of like real big questions on this, but we'll just cover it because it's here. But your hormones can be structured as proteins and polypeptides. Those are the most abundant structural form of hormones. Some of the ones that are secreted by the pituitary, both anterior and posterior, the hypothalamus and the pancreas, are proteins and polypeptides. Your amines are derived from tyrosine. These are things like dopamine, I don't know, it's kind of in there, right? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and these are secreted by the adrenal medulla and the thyroid, not the dopamine, epi, and norepi, but the amine hormones. And then steroid hormones are derived from cholesterol, and some examples of where you would find steroid hormones, they would be released from the adrenal cortex, the ovaries, and the testes. And some examples of those steroid hormones are aldosterone, cortisol, progesterone, testosterone. And if it sounds like I'm speaking Greek because you did not hear any of these words at EMT, it's because I am. And we're going to talk about all of these hormones individually here shortly. And then prostaglandins are also covered in your book in this section. They're not hormones at all, but I think your book just didn't know where else to put them. So we're going to talk about them. They do have similar effects. Okay, so prostaglandins are things that are involved in the inflammatory process. They're released locally by tissues. They cause things like capillary permeability, changes to smooth muscle tone, platelet aggregation, and pain. So you're aware, and they're released in one area and they work localized again to the area where they're made. Okay, so you would expect that if you twisted your ankle and you had swelling and pain in your ankle, right, that prostaglandins are probably going to be involved in that process. Okay, not hormones. So, but act or function similarly to hormones. All right, so this brings us into the organs, or the different glands and organs that are involved in the endocrine system. The first one we're going to talk about is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is really important because it is a neuroendocrine organ. So I'm going to write that up here. You should know that too. All right. It's a neuroendocrine organ. It sits in the brain, so it's part of the nervous system, but it also makes hormones. Okay. So an interesting thing about the hypothalamus is that it makes hormones and it stores them in the posterior pituitary, and it also makes hormones that it releases into the blood to communicate with the anterior pituitary. Okay, so it makes them and stores them in the posterior pituitary, and it releases hormones into the blood to communicate with the anterior pituitary. Okay, so we'll talk about all the hormones that it releases in just a second. On the next slide. The hypothalamus also has some other neural functions that were probably mentioned in the nervous system, but it's involved in temperature regulation, it's involved in heart rate, blood pressure, blood sugar control, and several other things, but it is a neuroendocrine organ, and for the endocrine system, that's a very important thing you need to know. Before you freak out about this slide, because everybody freaks out about this slide, I would have you do this in class, except you're not here. So you guys would have drawn this out. That's a hint. You probably should draw this out. This is what we call the hypothalamus highway, okay? Because the endocrine system, and specifically all the hormones that come from the hypothalamus, they go to the pituitary, and then they go to other tissues, and then they go to other tissues, and it's kind of like, think about turn-by-turn directions, right? If you are driving home and you don't really think about the directions that you took to get there because you drive that route every day, right? So if you understand the relay of how we get to the final destination of these hormones, right, it makes the whole process a little bit easier. So I don't necessarily have to, if I pick one thing on here like growth hormone, I don't have to talk about it in as much detail with the anterior pituitary because, well, that's probably not the best example. Let me pick a different one. We're going to talk about adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? I don't have to talk about that one as much with the anterior pituitary because I'm going to talk about it with the hypothalamus. It's eventually going to go to the adrenal cortex, right? And ultimately what I care about is what its final thing is, which is cortisol, and what it does, which is going to be a lot of things related to stress. So I'd recommend you write this down, pause this, write this down, but I'm going to keep talking here, and we're going to start with the hypothalamus. So we said hypothalamus is a neuroendocrine organ. I'm going to write it up here again because it's still very important. All right. And the hypothalamus is going to make hormones and store them in the posterior pituitary. So down here at the bottom, you see the posterior pituitary. It's going to make and store hormones in the posterior pituitary. Okay. It's also going to release hormones in the blood. So these hormones up here are released into the blood and are going to communicate with the anterior pituitary. Okay, so I'm going to change colors here. I'm going to draw my little lightning bolt. Okay. All right, so under hypothalamus, the first 7 hormones that you see, those are released into the blood, and they're going to communicate with the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus will also make and store antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin in the posterior pituitary. And when it's time for the posterior pituitary to open the gates and let those out into the blood, the hypothalamus will zap the posterior pituitary and say, hey, let that go. And now the posterior pituitary will let whichever hormone go. Okay, so nerve, endocrine. Okay, so 2 parts here. So we'll start with the ones that go to the anterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus has 7 hormones that it's going to release into the blood and send them to the anterior pituitary. So corticotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, prolactin inhibiting hormone, prolactin releasing hormone, and thyroid releasing hormone. These 7 again, right, are all going to be released into the blood. And where are they going to go? They're going to go over here to the anterior pituitary. That is their target tissue. Okay. When those hormones get to the anterior pituitary is going to release another hormone. Okay. So corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus is going to stimulate the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay. The anterior pituitary is just a relay station. You notice that, like, the hypothalamus is going to tell the anterior pituitary to just release another hormone, and then it's eventually going to go on, and it may end up at its target tissue, but it may have to go further beyond just that target tissue. Okay, so corticotropin releasing hormone is going to cause the anterior pituitary to release adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay. Growth hormone releasing hormone is going to stimulate the release of growth hormone from the anterior pituitary. Okay. Growth hormone is going to target all of your cells and tissues, and it's going to, increase your size and, when you're small, and then also be involved in healing of your tissues. Okay. Growth hormone, inhibiting hormone, and I'm going to just redraw this so you can see it. It stops the release of growth hormone. Okay. And then your gonadotropin releasing hormone, okay, is gonna cause the anterior pituitary to release follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Okay, those hormones are gonna travel to the gonads, which are the ovaries in women or the testes in men, and as a result, you're gonna get things like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone that are released and involved. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. Okay. Your prolactin hormones, I'm going to talk about the releasing hormone first because it's our go. Prolactin releasing hormone is going to cause the release of prolactin, and this is going to travel to the mammary glands, and it's going to be involved in the stimulation of milk production. Okay. And then prolactin inhibiting hormone up here is going to stop the release of prolactin. Okay. Thyroid releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus will also travel to the anterior pituitary. It will cause the release of thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone will go to the thyroid, and the thyroid will release T3 and T4. Okay. And these are going to be involved in metabolism, right? The thyroid regulates your metabolism. T3 and T4, when they're released, are going to work on basically all of your cells and tissues, okay? So the relay race, okay, is what we're seeing in this graph, okay? Rather than in your book where it's like several different tables, where it's like, these are the 7, 8, 9 things released from the hypothalamus, and 3 pages later, these are the ones that are released from the anterior and posterior pituitary, and a few pages later, this is estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. This gives you the whole pathway, okay? So again, I would recommend that you write this down, okay? From the posterior pituitary, okay? Actually, before I talk about the posterior pituitary, I've got one other thing to tell you. I would expect to see questions somewhere, sometime about where a hormone comes from. And one of the clues that will tell you that it came from the hypothalamus, okay, is this. If you see releasing or inhibiting, it came from the hypothalamus. That's the only place that you see that. It's also the only place that you see hormone, growth hormone, releasing hormone, okay? So if you see those terms, that should give you a clue that those hormones came from the hypothalamus, and if they came from the hypothalamus and they were released into the blood, they went to the anterior pituitary. Okay. All right. Moving down to the posterior pituitary, again, the hypothalamus makes hormones, stores them in the posterior pituitary, and then it comes over here and it lightning bolt zaps it when it wants it to release that hormone. And the 2 hormones that are released are antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Okay, so antidiuretic hormone, to diurese is to pee, anti is to stop. So antidiuretic hormone is going to be involved in stopping you from peeing. Why would you want to do that? Because you're dehydrated, because you're in shock. Okay, so it's going to be involved in that. And what organ's involved in making urine? The kidneys. So where's antidiuretic hormone going to go? It's going to go to the kidneys. Now, it's not just going to go to the kidneys. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But it also works on the blood vessels and causes vasoconstriction. So think kidneys to keep the salt in the water, right? So you lose less blood volume, and also the vessels, it causes vasoconstriction. In fact, antidiuretic hormone comes in a vial. We can give it as a drug, and it's called vasopressin, and it's because it'd be pressing the vessels to make them smaller. So think about things you would want to do in a patient in shock. Antidiuretic hormone is going to be involved in that, okay? Less fluid loss, increased pressure, okay? And then oxytocin is also released from the posterior pituitary. It is going to target the uterus and the breast in women, okay? It's going to stimulate uterine contraction. And so oxytocin, again, will travel to the uterus and the breast of women. In women, it will cause uterus contraction and production of milk in the breast tissue. Okay. Write this down. It's important stuff. I'll give you a second. All right, pituitary gland. Okay, so the pituitary gland sits below the hypothalamus. So this is just a zoomed in picture. There's your hypothalamus, and there's your pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary here, posterior pituitary here, and it sits within the I call it the Celica turca, like I have my syllables backwards, like the old Toyota Celica. But it's this, it is the Celica turca. It's not Celica turca. I got it backwards. Anyway, it sits in that depression within the sphenoid bone. Okay, and again, it is considered. It is not a neuroendocrine organ. It is just an endocrine organ, and it is considered the master gland. Okay, because its whole job, based on the last slide you probably saw, is its whole job is to just be the relay center between the hypothalamus and everything that the pituitary communicates to. It's the master gland because what does it do? It controls the other glands. Okay, so there is your pituitary. And again, it secretes a bunch of hormones. I've got them on another slide, and if you need a mnemonic or to help you memorize what they do or what hormones they are, here you have them. Okay, so this shows you, I like this graphic too. This shows you that up here you have the hypothalamus, right? The hypothalamus communicates with the anterior pituitary through blood, which you can't see that. Let's try another color. Through blood flow, right? But it communicates with the posterior pituitary. These are nerves right here via nerve transmission. Okay, so it makes vasopressin, it makes oxytocin, it stores it in the posterior pituitary, and when it says go, these nerves fire, right? And the posterior pituitary will then release either vasopressin / antidiuretic hormone or oxytocin. Okay. To help you remember the hormones of the anterior pituitary, you can use the acronym FLAT PEG. Okay, so follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. Okay, those are going to go to, I'll give you a second to tell me what tissue. If you don't remember, you got to go back like a minute and a half. All right, and then adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to target the adrenal glands. Thyroid stimulating hormone is going to target the thyroid. Prolactin is going to target the breast tissue. Endorphins make you feel good. Not like learning endocrine for the first time. And then growth hormone is going to target all of your tissues. Okay. So to give you an acronym here.
Stop
it. Oh, there you go. I'm having technical difficulties, don't mind me. Okay, the thyroid. Okay, I just want to show you where the thyroid is on this slide, and then we're going to get to drawing on the board for you guys because there's a lot. Okay, so the thyroid gland is a butterfly-shaped gland in the front of your neck. Okay, you can see it here. I got to change this color. It's going to be difficult for y'all to see. It's hard for me to see. Okay, but it is a butterfly-shaped gland. It's in the front of your neck. Okay, and you probably have already figured out that the thyroid is going to be responsible for cellular metabolism, and it's got a couple other functions that you're going to learn about. Right now. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. Get your pens ready because you and I are writing together. Okay, so here, grab your pens because we're all getting ready to write. We're going to talk about the thyroid and its hormones. Okay, so the thyroid has one function involved in cellular metabolism, and its other function is going to be involved in blood calcium levels. Okay, so cellular metabolism. We'll start here. All right, so cellular metabolism is part of that hypothalamus highway. So if you did not go write this down, you probably should have. Can't spell. There we go. Part of the hypothalamus highway. Okay, so the hypothalamus releases thyroid releasing hormone into the blood. Thyroid releasing hormone travels to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary releases thyroid stimulating hormone into the blood. the thyroid stimulating hormone travels through the circulatory system and gets to the thyroid, and then the thyroid will make T3 and T4. All right. T3 and T4 are going to increase cellular metabolism. These are going to target all cells. Okay. All right. So the first hormones are T3 and T4. They're going to be involved in cellular metabolism. Okay. The second function that I told you was calcium regulation. Okay. Now, make sure you know this. The calcium regulation has nothing to do with the hypothalamus highway. Okay, so it regulates calcium in conjunction with the parathyroid. Okay, so what happens is that when blood calcium levels are high, okay, calcitonin is released. Okay, so calcitonin is the hormone released when blood or serum calcium is high, okay? And it is going to function to lower calcium levels by a couple things. One, it's going to stimulate osteoclast activity. So we're going to say it's going to increase blast activity. Remember, blasts are builders, right? So if we have a lot of blood calcium, we would want to store it in the bones. How do we do that? We stimulate osteoblast activity. Okay, so that's going to store it in the bone. We're also going to inhibit osteoclast activity, so we're going to stop breaking down bones. We're also going to decrease calcium reabsorption in the kidneys. Okay, so this means that you're going to pee more of the calcium out. Okay, because this does this in conjunction with the parathyroid, I'm going to just talk about the parathyroid and then I'll show you a picture of the parathyroid. Okay, but the parathyroid, okay, is also involved in calcium regulation in conjunction with the thyroid. Okay, so these two, okay, the parathyroid and the thyroid are going to be in communication. One is going to lower calcium, one is going to raise calcium. Okay, so the thyroid with calcitonin is going to help lower calcium. When calcium levels need to be raised because they are low, the parathyroid is going to be responsible. Okay, so it's going to release parathyroid hormone. So PTH is parathyroid hormone. Okay, is going to be released when blood calcium is low. Okay, and it's going to do some of the opposite things. Okay, so it's going to increase blood calcium levels. Okay, by a few different things. Okay, it's going to stimulate osteoclast activity. All right, or increase osteoclast activity, right? So the osteoclasts are going to break down the bone, rob the bone of calcium, right? And this is going to raise the amount of calcium that's in the blood, okay? It's also going to increase absorption in the GI tract. And it's going to increase reabsorption in kidneys. Okay, so The net effect of the thyroid, so just to kind of back up here and restate, the thyroid has two major functions. The first function is cellular metabolism. It does this job in response to stimulation by the hypothalamus. Its second role is in calcium regulation. Calcium regulation is managed by the thyroid and the parathyroid. The thyroid is going to lower blood calcium levels. The parathyroid is going to raise blood calcium levels, okay? So the thyroid does its activity by the use of calcitonin. The parathyroid does its activity by use of parathyroid hormone, or PTH. All right, the parathyroid glands are studded in the back of the thyroid. Okay, so these little glands that you're seeing that I'm coloring in for you are parathyroid glands. Okay, so they are connected, if you will, to the thyroid, or they're embedded, probably is a better way to say that, studded into the thyroid. Okay, and now you already know what the parathyroid does because we covered that on the last slide. Okay. The next organ that we're going to talk about is the next organ we're going to talk about is the thymus. Okay, so the thymus is this butterfly-shaped organ in your chest. Okay, that you can see here. The thymus is located in the mediastinum, and it releases a hormone called thymosin. I'll write it up here. All right, so thymosin is released, and what thymosin does is it promotes the development and maturation of part of your immune cells. So promotes maturation of T lymphocytes. Okay, and not to get too deep into the weeds here, but your immune system has a bunch of different cells that are involved. It has B cells and it has T cells, right? These are both types of lymphocytes. The B cells mature in the bone. The T cells mature in the thymus. And when you're a child, you have to you have a bigger thymus because you have an immature immune system, right? So as you age, the thymus gets smaller because you have better maturation of your immune system. Okay, but your T cells are going to be involved in cell-mediated immune response, which we discuss further in chapter 9. All right, the pancreas is the next organ that we have to talk about. The pancreas does a lot of different things. So and this is not in conjunction with the hypothalamus highway. So I got a whole blank slide that we're getting ready to show you. But I want to point out some things, right? So when we're looking at this is the pancreas right here, this yellow organ. You have the head of the pancreas right here, the body of the pancreas here, and the tail of the pancreas here. The pancreatic duct, okay, is going to be involved in carrying pancreatic juices into the digestive tract. So it's probably important to note that the pancreas is both an endocrine and exocrine organ. Okay, so its endocrine function, you guys all know from EMT, is that it regulates blood sugar. All right, its exocrine function is in the creation and making of digestive enzymes. Okay, so endocrine and exocrine. 99% of your pancreatic cells, they call them, are pancreatic acini or acini, depending on who you ask. 99% of those cells are exocrine cells making digestive enzymes. Only 1% of your pancreas is made up of those islets of Langerhans that produce endocrine hormones that are involved in the regulation of your blood sugar. Okay. I don't know, I usually mention this in class, so I'm just going to mention it now. There's a shared space right here in the digestive system, in the duodenum of the digestive system, where, and this is called the ampulla of Vater or Vader, depending on who you ask, where the digestive enzymes of the pancreas and bile from the gallbladder both exit. And one of the problems with gallstones, so stones from the gallbladder, is that sometimes they get stuck in this spot, right? And they can actually cause, one, you'd have cholecystitis or a problem with your gallbladder, but it can block the digestive enzymes from being able to get out of the pancreas. And so if a gallstone were to get stuck there, your pancreas, you would end up with pancreatitis, and your pancreas would essentially digest itself. It's called autodigestion, right? Your pancreas, those digestive enzymes would just sit there and it would like eat itself. So kind of not something you really want to play around with. Okay. All right, so that gives us our exocrine function. We'll talk a little bit more about the endocrine function and the hormones involved in endocrine function of the pancreas. Okay. So those islets of Langerhans, there's a couple different types of cells within them. You have your alpha cells, okay? You have beta cells. You have delta cells. Oh. And you also have F cells, which are more involved in the exocrine functions, okay? But this is hormones for blood sugar. Let me go ahead and write that up here. So blood sugar regulation. So your alpha cells within those islets of Langerhans are going to produce glucagon. All right. Okay. Glucagon is going to be excreted when blood sugar is low. Okay. And its function is going to be to raise blood sugar. Okay. It's going to function to raise blood sugar. Okay. It's going to do this by increasing glycogenolysis, which is the breakdown or the lysing of glycogen. Okay, so maybe you recall, but if you don't, I'll go ahead and tell you. Your excess blood sugar can be stored in the liver and the muscles in the form of glycogen, right? And it's basically stored there for later use, so that every time you get hungry, you don't die, right? You have some stored glucose stored in the form of glycogen. But when your blood sugar gets low, right, your alpha cells will release glucagon. The goal of glucagon is to raise blood sugar. It's going to do this by breaking glycogen back down into glucose so that your cells can use them. Okay, glycogen is stored primarily in the liver and skeletal muscles. Okay. Your beta cells have a different function, or the opposite function. So the beta cells secrete insulin, and insulin's job is to lower blood sugar. Okay, so when blood sugar is high, insulin will get secreted. Okay, and it is going to allow for cellular uptake of insulin or of glucose. So it's going to promote cellular uptake of glucose. And it will also promote, with the excess sugar that's in your blood, it will promote glycogenesis, which is the storing of that sugar as glycogen. So we made more glycogen, and both of those things will lower blood sugar levels. Your delta cells are going to secrete somatostatin. Okay, and somatostatin is kind of like the balancer, the balancing hormone. Okay, so you guys know that a normal blood sugar is like 70 to 110-ish, right? So if you only had alpha cells and beta cells, when your blood sugar got over here to 69, right, you would secrete glucagon until it got up to 110, or excuse me, it got up to 111. And when it got to 111, you would come over here and you would secrete insulin. And that's a really energy heavy thing to do, to take your sugar all the way from low all the way to like the high end of normal and back and forth and back and forth. So what somatostatin does is it inhibits the alpha and beta cells when blood sugar is normal. Okay? So it says, hey, girls, you're both pretty. You don't have to be competing all the time. All right? You're both great. All right? There's a whole story about that. For those of you guys that are listening, I'll tell it to you when you come back in tomorrow, hopefully. Let me know. I'll remind you. Okay? Well, I won't remind you because I'll forget to tell you the story if you don't remind me. But that's how I know you're watching. Okay? So that is the function of your delta cells. Okay? And then there's also your F cells. This has more to do with digestion. Your book mentions them, but your F cells, I'm not going to write them up here, inhibit gallbladder contraction and regulate some of the pancreatic exocrine enzymes, so digestive enzymes. All right, the next organ that we're going to talk about are your adrenal glands. So your adrenal glands are located on the superior aspect of your kidneys. They're on your the top of your adrenals, right? And they have two parts. They have a medulla and a cortex. Okay, they have a medulla and a cortex. Okay, the outer part of the gland is the cortex. Okay, the inner part is the middle or medulla. Okay, your adrenal medulla is also this part. Okay, is also a neuroendocrine tissue. All right, your cortex is just endocrine, just has endocrine function. Okay, so we will talk about all of these. Okay, so the hormones of the adrenal cortex. Okay, probably worth mentioning that your adrenal cortex, the outer part of your adrenal glands, okay, have different zones that release different types of hormones, corticosteroids, gonatocorticoids, and mineralocorticoids. Again, never seen a test question on the difference between them, but you do need to know the individual hormones. So we're going to go through those. So the adrenal cortex is going to be involved in cortisol release. Okay, so the cortisol is, we mentioned it before, on that hypothalamus highway, is your stress hormone. All right, so think about the things that are involved in chronic stress, right? Like you're more likely to get sick, right? You're more likely to have high blood sugar, right? You're more likely to have high blood pressure, right? Cortisol is that stress hormone, and so things that cortisol does is it suppresses the immune system, right? It causes the release of a raising of the blood sugar, right? It causes some other things, but cortisol being your stress hormone, those are some of the things that you would expect to see with increased cortisol production. Okay, and that again is part of that hypothalamus highway. Okay. It also releases aldosterone. Okay, and aldosterone is going to target the kidneys and the blood vessels. All right, and it's going to cause retention of salt and water, and it's also going to cause the excretion of potassium. All right, so we're going to have a little sidebar conversation here because there's a system that you guys need to know about. So this is going to be our little segue, our little sidebar, and this is the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. Okay, so There's more than just aldosterone. Obviously, renin, angiotensin, and aldosterone are all involved here. This is something that you really need to know, and this feels like as good a time as any as to discuss it. Okay, so this is a sidebar. Again, multiple organs involved. So in response to hypoperfusion or low blood pressure, which is going to be sensed by the kidneys, right? So your kidneys are you're going to hear this again in renal, but really important to understand it. But when the kidneys sense that they're not being perfused, either because your blood pressure is low or because you have damage to the renal vessels and you're not getting good perfusion in the kidneys will release renin into the blood. All right? Released by the kidneys into the blood. All right? This is the kidneys. Help, help. I'm very pressure sensitive and the body's not doing well because I'm not doing well. We need to increase blood pressure, okay? So renin is going to be released into the blood, and renin is going to find a, plasma protein called angiotensinogen. All right, now I want you to think about these words. Angio means vessel, gen means to generate, and tense, like tighten. So at the end of this renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system is going to generate tight blood vessels, is going to increase blood pressure. Okay, so renin going to be in the blood. It's going to meet up with angiotensinogen that's floating around in the blood, and together they will make angiotensin 1. All right, now angiotensin 1 is floating around in the blood, and eventually it is going to get to the lungs where it is going to find ACE, which is the place with helpful hardware. No, all right, which is angiotensin converting enzyme. Okay, and angiotensin 1, when it finds ACE, is going to make angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is your moneymaker. Okay, this is where the magic happens. So we're going to put some dollar bills here. All right, so angiotensin 2 is going to cause a bunch of things to happen. Okay. It is going to, so this is angio 2, all right? It is going to, just by existing, it's going to cause blood vessels to constrict. What's that going to do to your blood pressure? It's going to increase it, all right? It's also going to cause the release of antidiuretic hormone from the posterior pituitary. Yes, that says PP, it means posterior pituitary. And antidiuretic hormone is also going to cause blood vessels to constrict. All right. It's going to cause you to keep or retain, stop from peeing salt and water. So you're going to not pee as much to keep the salt and keep the water. Okay. And it's going to cause the release of aldosterone, which is how we got here over there on number 2, okay, from the adrenals, which is also going to say retain salt and water and excrete potassium. Okay, so a really important system you need to know about, and this felt like as good of a place as any, but part of the renin-angiotensin system is aldosterone. Aldosterone is the part that comes from the adrenal cortex, right? Renin, again, from the kidney. Angiotensin 1 is just hanging out in the blood. When they meet, they make angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is now hanging out in the blood. It meets with ACE in the lungs, and it forms angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 has a cascade reaction. It does all of these things, and the net effect is to stop the loss in the urine, right, because your pressure's low, and to increase systemic vascular resistance, or to make your blood vessels tight. That's the net effect, right? So we're going to increase vascular contraction, make your blood pressure go up, and we're going to stop you from losing any more volume. All right, the other thing that, so now going back to the adrenal cortex, right? said adrenal cortex releases cortisol, it releases aldosterone, right, as part of that renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And the third thing that it's going to release are gonatocorticoids. Okay, which are going to target most cells. Okay, and they're going to be your estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and we're going to cover them when we talk about the gonads, and they're in the next couple slides. So you don't have to write it twice. Here's just another picture of the adrenal glands, and it shows the different zones of the adrenal cortex and the different hormones that are released. It also shows the adrenal medulla that we're going to talk about next. So the medulla right here in the middle, okay, is going to be involved in epinephrine and norepinephrine response. So remember I told you that the adrenal medulla was a neuroendocrine gland, or had neuroendocrine functions. So the adrenal medulla okay, your nerves come in and they release neurotransmitters and they stimulate the adrenal medulla. Okay, this is part of the sympathetic nervous system. So your fight or flight response, the nerve releases neurotransmitters, sympathetic neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, and they land on the adrenal medulla, and the adrenal medulla goes, oh man, we got a problem, and it's going to start making and releasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, so when that norepi was released from the nerve, it was a neurotransmitter. Okay, when the adrenal medulla releases it, it releases it into the blood along with epinephrine, and now it's a hormone because it came out of a gland and it is now in the blood, and so it's a hormone. Functionally, they do the same thing. Okay, so epi and norepi are going to be involved in, you guys learned this in the nervous system if you were paying attention, stimulating like alpha 1, beta 1, beta 2, right? I'm going to leave alpha 2 off here so you don't get confused. We'll talk about it more in pharm. But alpha 1 is going to cause vasoconstriction. All right. Beta 1 is going to cause, I kind of screwed this up, sorry y'all. Beta 1 is going to cause increase in heart work, right? So you get an increase in the heart rate, which is chronotropy. Increased. The heart squeeze, which is inotropy. And the speed of conduction through the conduction system, which is dromotropy. Okay, and you're also going to get from beta, excuse me, this one's from beta 2. All right, you're going to get bronchodilation. Why do you need all these things when the sympathetic nervous system gets kicked off? Because you either have to run or you have to fight a bear. And to do that, you need to shunt blood away from areas that don't need it. You need your heart to pump faster so that oxygenated blood can fuel the important tissues, and you need to bring in lots and lots of air so that you have the oxygen for your heart to pump around to deliver to the important tissues so that you can win the battle with the bear. Okay, so the adrenal medulla, that is its job. Okay, it is again, wow, that looks funny. Shouldn't have looked like that. It is a neuroendocrine organ or structure. Okay, this part. All right, we have 2 things left to talk about. That's the gonads and the pineal gland, and we are done with this lecture. All right, so the gonads. All right, the gonads are your ovaries in women, your testes in men, right? And they're going to be stimulated by luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So if we back all the way up to that thing you guys saw at the beginning, the hypothalamus highway, the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone into the blood. It floats around to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary receives it and will release follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Those two hormones are going to target the ovaries in women, the testes in men. Okay. And then you're going to get the release of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone in varying quantities. Okay. So, functions for those hormones. Okay. Estrogen. Okay. Estrogen is going to be released, and it's going to target most cells, but primarily female reproductive, or most cells, female reproductive tissues. Okay. It's going to stimulate secondary sexual characteristics in women. Stimulate the development of secondary sexual characteristics. Okay. So think puberty, what happens to females when they go through puberty. These are your secondary sexual characteristics. Okay. It's also going to be involved in the regulation of pregnancy and the menstrual cycle, which I can't spell, so hold on. There we go. Gotta find it on my sheet. Terrible. Okay. You have progesterone, and it's primarily going to target the uterus. Okay. It's going to stimulate uterine changes in preparation for pregnancy or gestation. Some other things that it's going to do is going to regulate the menstrual cycle as well. And it's going to prevent maturation of additional eggs during ovulation. This is why twins are so rare. One of the reasons. Okay, so progesterone. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then testosterone is the last one here. And testosterone is, I hate to say is to men what estrogen is to women, but it kind of is. So testosterone is going to stimulate most cells, right? Primarily male reproductive. Okay. It's going to be involved in the development of secondary sex characteristics in men. Okay, so these are all hormones that you're going to see from released from the gonads. Okay. And then the last organ we have to talk about is next. The last organ is the pineal gland or pineal gland, depending on who you ask. Okay, this one's easy. Okay, the pineal gland produces melatonin. Okay, and if you have trouble sleeping, you probably already know what melatonin is. But melatonin is going to be responsible for regulating your sleep-wake cycle, and some people swear by it to get up to sleep. But melatonin is involved in sleep-wake cycle and involved in helping you get a restful night's sleep. Okay. Hope you enjoyed a whole bunch of new things in exactly 59 minutes, or maybe a few seconds less. We'll see you tomorrow.